Welcome everybody. I'm Rami Khoury, Director of the Islam Paris Institute. Thank you all for coming. I just wanted to say welcome and also just to quickly mention how this lecture is part of a bigger program that IFI is running, run by Lana Salman and Hani Biktash. Hani will tell you a little bit about, but I just wanted to mention how this issue of analyzing policy in all fields is becoming really the central focal point of IFI, along with the second part of our name, Islam Paris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, along with the international dimension of policy making and policy formulation and the players and the interests and constraints and how policy actually happens. So we're very pleased at this lecture Dr. Hima Khudra, because this is an example, we think, of really some of the best ways that IFI can work, which is to fund original research by an AUB professor, or could be an outside AUB, mostly we fund AUB professors, doing research on indigenous issues throughout the Arab world, sharing this knowledge with people, and then interacting, as she has done, with institutions in Doha and Kuwait and UAE, and we're now, I just came back from Doha, and we're setting up working relationships with counterparts to do this on a regional level. So we hope this will push forward our work studying public policy. So I wanted to thank Liv Hiba for doing this and continuing to be a good partner, and Lana and Anya for the work they do. And I'll turn it over to Hani Biktash, who will talk to you just very briefly about what we're doing in public policy research and introducing it. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I just want to tell you a little bit more about the Research Advocacy and Public Policy program at IFI. We're currently working on 4 projects, kind of at the same time in parallel, all with the goal of studying the public policy making process in the Arab world. One of them is looking at NGOs, the work of NGOs, and seeing how they influence the policy-making process. And it's a transnational NGO project that we're doing in correlation with this, the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. And another one is a faith-based organization project. It's also studying the role of faith-based organizations in public policy-making in the Arab world. And the newest one that we've launched is called the Consortium of Arab Policy Research Institutes Project, which is basically think tanks. We're looking at the role of think tanks. And finally, we're doing a project that studies policy making in reverse, which is the Policy Tracing Project. And we're doing that with the Syria Trust for Development and the Dubai School of Government, which is we look at a policy that has either been already formulated or nearly formulated and kind of trace back who are the stakeholders and the interest groups, and how did that come to formulation. So that's what we're working on right now. Appreciate you having you here. I'd like to introduce Dr. Khudra. She received her PhD at the Florida State University SQ School of Public Administration and Public Policy, and she joined AUB in 2006. She's currently assistant professor of public policy and public management. She's been involved in several projects for ESPA related to the public sector and issues of governance, which is her current research interests are now in policymaking in the Gulf, in the GCC countries, public management in developing countries, and modernization of the public sector, mainly in the Arab world. So last summer she was selected as a research fellow at the Brookings Institute in Doha, and she has conducted a comparative study for them on policy making in Kuwait and Qatar. Today her lecture is entitled The Innovations and Diffusion for Regional Development, the Specialized Cities Phenomenon in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hiba Khudra. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanya. Thank you, Rami. Good afternoon. I'm really glad that you're all here, and hopefully I'll be able to share with you what I've been doing for the last couple of years almost. This is the topic today is accumulation of research that I have conducted with my colleague of mine in the Department of Political Studies and Public Administration here at AUB, Dr. Daniel Reich. He is on leave this semester, that's why I'm presenting by myself. But you see his pictures during the presentation, so that's proof that we were there together. The title of my presentation today, and by the way, this research was funded by Sam Paris Institute, as Rami has mentioned, Policy, Innovation and Diffusion in the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Specialized Cities Phenomenon. And during this, the presentation, basically, I'm going to focus a little bit on talking generally about the GCC, and then a little bit of analysis of policy making in the area. Of course, will focus on the 3 case studies that we have selected to do this research. And I'll share with you some of the findings. There is some of this presentation that has to do with the theories and the theoretical frameworks that we have used, and I'll include this. I won't bore you too much with this, but just give you an idea of where we came from and what kind of literature we had to review to come up with, to be able to do the analysis and put our findings in an empirical way. The GCC was created in 1981. It aims at enhancing the coordination and cooperation and integration between the member states of all the in all fields, basically, so in all policy areas. The GCC includes, of course, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. When we talk about the city phenomena, we're referring to what we have decided to call, and this is something that is not available in the literature, we called it the specialized city. Or in another conference I was at, we decided to call it the themed city. And a specialized city as a town is basically a town which has the main purpose of implementing policy innovations in a selected area. Many of these specialized cities are what they call cluster-focused development plans, and this is basically from the business literature. Most of these cities can be found in Dubai, but actually the pioneer, the first one who has established such a city in the region, I'm not talking internationally, is Qatar, by establishing Education City, which we'll get to talk about a little bit more. This is a graph that shows you briefly the diffusion of specialized cities in the GCC, and you could see that between almost 1997 all the way to 2009, because this study we stopped at 2009 last year. The diffusion has shown, has been appearing as a fast diffusion of specialized city in the GCC. I will talk about diffusion a little bit. Basically, this paper draws upon 3 major theoretical frameworks. The first one is the main one that we have used. The other 2 we were required to use for publication purposes. I'm not keen on them too much. But the first one is the one that is very popular in the theories of policy making, which is the policy adoption and diffusion theoretical framework that was developed by Berry and Berry in 1990 and then in 1992. It has been applied to different policy formulation and implementation over the years in different sectors, basically. The other framework that we have used is mostly economic based, is the innovation system frameworks. And the third one that is definitely part of what we were trying to explain and helped us basically explain our findings is the political choice theories, and I'll go over these in a little bit. Basically, when we talk about innovation, we are referring to any program that is new to the country adopting it. And diffusion is defined as the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among members of the social system. Now, basically, our paper or our research was conducted qualitatively. We actually conducted interviews, there were close to 27 interviews conducted with key stakeholders, with administrators, with high officials and ministries and so forth. And our purpose was not only to examine the spread of the city phenomena in the GCC countries, but also to explain how this phenomena is related to policy innovation. Are these cities actually influencing policy making, or are they part of a policy making process? So, which leads to a broader question: what did motivate, or what motivates a country to adopt such policy innovation? We focus on a limited number of variables, and I'll show you in a little bit, from what's called the internal determinants model, and then we elaborate to create a model of our own because, and this is I don't want to call it a problem, but let's call it an issue. It's a condition, because a condition turns into a problem once you decide to do something about it, and I have decided to do something about it. There is no policy framework available, no theoretical policy framework available that could explain policy making in the GCC. So we could borrow from these internal determinants that belong to a certain model that's available in the literature, but we don't have one that completely fits, you know, the reality that we have. So our unit of analysis was the adopting country in the GCC. Basically, we use the case study method. We have decided to select 3 case studies. The first one was Education City in Qatar, and obviously you could see that we decided on Education City because we're talking about education policy. We chose Masdar City, which is carbon-free, zero waste city established in Abu Dhabi. So this is in the area of environmental policy, renewable energy and so forth. And then we chose also the Dubai healthcare city. So now we're moving into another major policy area, which is healthcare. And we conducted the interviews actually going there and meeting with people. We went to the 3 sites and so forth. Now, innovation, these are the 3, my PowerPoint on my laptop does really interesting things with this, but I'm not able to do that on this laptop, but it was really fancy. So pretend it is fancy. Policy innovation framework, political choice determinants, innovation system framework are the 3 major ones that we use to explain innovation. And then policy diffusion framework and then regional innovation system framework are the ones that we use. Again, I'm not going to bore you with all of this, but basically we looked at all the economic factors, at all the social factors that are described in the literature, political factors that include national mood, public opinion, policy entrepreneurs, policy window, and so forth, and other factors that include the obstacles and the available resources to overcome these obstacles. Let's see. Political choice determinants, again, we don't have to go over all of these. I'll show you at the end the model that we created based on these different models available in the literature. The diffusion, in terms of diffusion, we looked at the different determinants for diffusion that include the level of communication between the state officials and how much shared interest they have. The geographical proximity, that's very important, very crucial in the GCC because all these countries are proximate to each other. Learning from other countries, this, we could discuss this further later on, hopefully during the Q&A session. Competition, this is a keyword in the GCC. I mean, who's going to be able to build the longest tower, the highest clock in the world, and so forth. Perception of the innovating states, and the pressure to conform to national and regionally accepted standards. Okay, so most of our interview questions were around these major points. The main drivers for the specialized cities, the actors involved in the implementation process, the success conditions for the implementation, the obstacles, the objectives. Was this a pioneer case? Are you the first one who created an education city around the world? And whether your specialized city was copied regionally or internationally. Our limitations are not too hard to discover. First of all, it's very hard to get to the people, especially via email. This is definitely not a choice in the GCC unless somebody's name is Catherine, or they won't answer your email. So this was really an obstacle that we have to find. But we ended up actually, when we went there, we knew some people that we wanted to interview. We actually did walk in. And I always put Daniel in the front because he's tall and blonde, and so I say, okay, Daniel, just go in. And we actually were able to interview somebody really high in the Ministry of Health in Dubai by just walking in. So, but basically the gatekeepers, the closed system was really hard to overcome. The unique political system that exists in the region, and then, of course, very little, if not, basically, we were not able to find any academic literature on policy making in the GCC. It was not, available, basically. In terms of academic work, you might find articles in newspaper and magazines, and then the policy influence could not be evaluated, at least not yet, because even Masdar City is not completed. It was supposed to be completed, I think, 2015. Now I just found out yesterday, just because I'm preparing for this lecture, that it has been postponed till 2025. Education City is almost completed, but there's still some work to be done and so forth. And Dubai Healthcare City still is not operating in terms of a medical school with Harvard and so forth. So there's still room to evaluate, basically. This is on the construction side in Masdar. I introduced you to Daniel. Masdar City, the construction actually started in 2006, and the completion is scheduled now for 2025, as I mentioned. It's really interesting. I really have to share this with you. The objective of the city is to become home to a population of 90,000. Made up of 40,000 residents and 50,000 daily commuters. And we talked to so many people there, and they thought this is like not. Who are we building this city for? Are the people in the United Arab Emirates, are they actually going to live in Masdar City? Do they believe in the cause, for which Masdar City has been created, or are we going to end up with creating something for the expats, which is another big issue in the GCC. It hopes to attract more than 1,500 companies in the field of sustainable energy technologies, to have offices and research centers within its city walls. So this is another issue that we yet have to evaluate whether this is going to be doable, accomplishable, or not. This is a view from of Masdar City, basically. Dubai Healthcare City was launched in 2002, funded through the partnership of the public sector and the private sector. You're going to find out that most of these cities are either governmentally funded or semi-governmental institutions. They're all established as free zones, which means that they have so many facilities. You could do investments in these cities and you're not taxed, and they give you like kind of a visa easily. So there are some facilities, or user-friendly, if you want, institution. There's an academic medical center. It was basically established to improve the health status of families in Dubai and in the region, and ultimately, which is the same sentence you'll find for each of these cities, ultimately make Dubai a regional healthcare hub, ultimately make Education City, or Qatar, actually Doha, the education hub of the region. Ultimately, make Masdar City the environmentally safe, city of the region. So this is, it's kind of, I'm going to be the one who's going to do the healthcare, I'm going to be the one who's going to be doing education and so forth. This is basically in front of the map of Qatar Education City. It was established in 1995. It's the first one, first specialized city. It's a non-profit organization funded by the Qatari government. It is, we'll come to this in terms of policy implication, but It is part of the whole education reform in Qatar that started earlier than Education City, that aims at, they call it education for a new era. So, you know, the whole education reform, Qatar Education City is part of it. It has all these higher institutions, of course, they're all American institutions. The last addition to the city was a couple of years ago with the communication school, Western, Kennedy West, no. Yes, thank you. So, so basically they have 6 universities and again, established to make Qatar not only the hub for education but also a knowledge producing. We're all talking about sustainable education, sustainable economic development, sustainable, you know, all the sustainability is becoming like another important issue on the agenda of everybody in the world. And basically, it has been said that Education City is certainly an innovative concept and project with no previous map to follow. It's, you know, the scale and the scope of Education City is you know, really something that has not been done before. All right. The similarities, to wrap up, the similarities between the 3 cases is that policy making, and this comes with no surprise to anybody, that, you know, we all know that it is a centralized top-down process. I will share with you what I discovered after I have conducted research this summer that is not completely true. I don't call it anymore centralized top-down process. I call it the ripple effect policy-making process, where there are circles of trust in the region, and the circle of trust becomes, you know, multiplied. It all depends on the person who threw the object to start with. So I think I changed my mind in terms of whether it is completely a centralized top-down process. The role of influential individuals still remain a major similarity between the 3 cases. They all have in mind the objective of achieving economic diversification. It is definitely an innovative perspective. There's always education and research under one roof. You have Harvard in Dubai Healthcare City. You have Cornell Medical School in Education City. Of course, education is tied to research. And you have Research Institute under Education City. You have think tanks, you have RAND, Policy Center, and so forth. They're all established as free zones, and they're all government-funded projects. They all ran into similar obstacles in the implementation process. And these obstacles we could discuss during the Q&A session, if you'd like. The differences are basically that Dubai Healthcare City has to be economically efficient in the short term. So there's a problem with how efficient this model is going to be even in the long term. So we're not in the short term, we're not even talking about the long term. Education City is part of the whole idea of, it falls under Vision 2030 in Qatar, which has to do with the modernization of the society in general, education being one of the main important pillars of modernization of any society and development. Masdar City became actually the headquarters of a major international organization called ARENA. This is the model that we came up with, which tells you basically what are the determinants that are existing in other models in the literature that are applicable to our case. And basically we found out that in all the 3 cases of policy, innovation, and diffusion, we have what we call policy entrepreneurs, but they are different than the policy entrepreneurs that we know somewhere else. These policy entrepreneurs are willing to invest their time and money, I'm not sure, because they are recruited to do policy, because they're there because there is money there. So they have a different they have different set of characteristics, if you want. There are policy windows, of course. You know, we say that Qatar, right now, Qatar is the land of opportunity for its, you know, Qatar is booming. You always hear that, especially if they win the bid for 2022 Mondial, the World Cup. So if they're able to do that, they're talking about an area that is extremely fertile for business opportunities, even research opportunities and otherwise. Social determinants, definitely the social needs and problems are common to the three countries. They have almost the same cultural characteristics, same demographic characteristics. Basically, Dubai, United Arab Emirates and Qatar are the top two countries in terms of the percentage of expats. For example, in Qatar, 80%, and the real number is even more than 80%, but this is the published number, 80% of the residents of Qatar are non-Qataris. So you end up with only 20, even less, who are actually Qatari. So Dubai is almost, I think 32, the last number I read. So, this is kind of similar demographic characteristic. Financial resources, we're talking about countries that have abundant financial resources, specifically Qatar. I mean, it's the second wealthiest country in the world. I mean, this is where Qatar is standing right now. Level of economic development, we could argue about that, but employment, workforce, same thing. In all of these countries, they have policies that have to do with what we call in Qatar, Qatarization. I don't know if they call it Emiratization and the Emirates or whatever. So, these policies are common in terms of the percentage or the composition of the workforce. The level of communication coordination between the state officials, because being member of the GCC community, if you want, you have certain shared interests, even if it is on papers, even if it's not in reality. Geographic proximity, we talked about that. Regional competition, you want to be the first mover, you want to get the first mover advantage. You learn from other countries. This is also an issue that opens a can of worms if you want to discuss it. The issue of policy transfer from somewhere else, whether this is a healthy way of transferring policy or not. I call it, instead of doing cut and paste, they should do cut, edit, and then paste. So, this is another issue. Perception of being the innovating state. This is something that is definitely part of the underlying goal of innovating. You have some pressure to conform to internationally and regionally accepted standards. For example, Qatar, I mentioned Qatar more because I've been in Qatar more, so I'm more familiar with Qatar. In Qatar, they do what I call collecting brand names, but I say they do it strategically because they have a vision, and so they're strategically collecting brand names. And then you have regional clusters, of course, in the GCC. And of course, the impact of innovation on policy and domestic diffusion is one of the determinants for the diffusion of these policies. Okay, what did I do here? It's not going. Okay, so the spread of the specialized cities in the GCC countries can be mostly explained within the analytical model of policy innovation and diffusion. The proposed model that I just told you include the determinants of policy innovation and diffusion in the GCC, specifically in the three countries that we have selected. The diffusion of the general phenomena of the specialized cities is occurring rather than a specific type of a specialized city. So we're not copying the education city, we're just copying the idea of having a specialized city. And the specialized cities are not really isolated museums. Each of these cities, hopefully, has already influenced the policy process in each of these countries. There are several theories that were developed to explain policy adoption in the American states. What is needed, again, as I mentioned in the start, is to develop a theoretical model of government innovation and diffusion policy which takes into account the specific character of resource-rich countries or states governed by ruling elites, and this is very important, this is what I call the circle of trust, the royal family, the ruling family, and so forth, such as the GCC countries, as well as the culture-specific variables in these Muslim-majority societies. This is where we were in the GCC. This is the past. This is what the present looks like. This is Dubai, the highest tower in the world, the highest clock in the world in Mecca and Saudi Arabia. And this is almost into the future, which is King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid. At this time, we're going to be taking questions and answers for however long you have questions and answers. I'll walk with the mic, and if you'll just raise your hand, identify yourself, your name, and maybe where you're from, and yeah, whoever would like to begin.
Thank you. My name is Saad Aram. I'm from the World Bank. Basically, what I would like to hear more, thanks for this very interesting presentation actually. I was hoping to hear more about the background for all these policies, for all these innovations, and what are the macroeconomic incentives, objectives, where they're coming from, who's the audience of all these policies, as you mentioned, 20% national, 80%. The issue of competition among countries by providing, there's no more first come, first serve, because all of them are creating the same things. The education cities you find in Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is moving aggressively into this area with huge funds, basically. The issue of spatial detachment of these cities from the city itself. There's a lot of cultural and social implications from the spatial detachment. And what's if the scenario is these things fail, basically? They become like real estate development projects in the city, or what's the future of these things? Thank you.
I think we'll do one at a time.
I'll start from the end. Basically, the implication of these cities, if we want to talk about the implications in terms of policy, definitely there's, as I mentioned, when we talk about education city is going to be leaving an impact on the whole education policy of the country. So, we're going to end up with, a new generation, hopefully, who are going to be the thinkers, the innovators, and so forth. But these are the objectives. But whether these objectives are going to be fulfilled or not, especially when we talk about the 20%, when we talk about the 20%, there is some questions that are being raised recently. Who are we building these cities for? Especially education city. Are we building these, are we bringing these top universities in the United States, put them in Qatar? Are we educating the son, and no offense to any nationality, of course, but this is what I've heard from Qataris. Are we willing to fund the education of the son of the Bangladeshi or the Iraqi or the, because, of course, I understand money makes the world turn around, of course, but there are some implications, and how much this education city, first of all, is education city building a culture for itself? Do you walk into education city and feel like this is really an education city, or is it a collection of buildings built with high standards? All the dorms, I think, and the faculty buildings are built with these walls. I don't understand them very well, but they're other than solar energy and the whole thing. Lead free and very high standard in terms of the energy and the environment and so forth. Are we changing the culture of the people? I was just chatting with Rami before the lecture. I was in Brookings over the summer, and all the events we had in Brookings and even in Georgetown, an education city, were attended mostly, if if not completely, by expats. So we're bringing all these institutions, we're bringing think tanks, we're bringing research institutes, we're bringing universities to the country, and to open discussions and to let the people think. And what are we ending up with? I mean, the expats who are attending. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. They're part of the people who live in the country. But if our target is to embark on development and educational reform and so forth, I mean, this is going to be difficult to achieve. If we, I mean, I did my event in Brookings to present the findings. There were only 2 Qataris in the audience. I mean, and I was talking about an issue that is extremely politically sensitive in Qatar. Nobody ever talked about policy making. Nobody ever dared talk about policy making in Qatar. When I had my first press conference, the reporter kept telling me, I said, in Qatar they don't need democracy yet. This was what I said. And he said, do you want me to quote you on this? And I felt like he kept asking me the question. I felt like, okay, maybe I'm saying something I shouldn't say. I mean, this is exactly what happened. I actually got a call from a relative of mine who lives in Qatar after he read the article, although they censor a lot. I mean, there's just completely censorship, self-censorship, basically, that, we might be deported, because I said, so I mean, an event such as this one, the one that I gave in Qatar should have attracted so many people in Qatar, but basically it was not attractive. So to change the culture or to change the, to have implications, I guess it might happen, but it's going to take a long time. It's not a click of a button. They do a campaign in Qatar. They have a campaign initiated by the founder of Education City, Sheikh Amoza. And she wanted to do a campaign to let people think, and so she did this whole campaign. She got the people who did the campaign for the Mac computer, Apple, and millions of dollars to put all over the city and even in international airports in New York and Chicago or wherever, these signs that says innovate, think, imagine. Is this enough to make people think and innovate? And so basically what I'm telling you, this is a project that's gonna, this is to me, these are too ambitious. These are too ambitious, this one. I forgot your first part of the question, I'm sorry.
Just if I could add, the objective is economic diversification. Is that right? I mean, the strategic objective is economic diversification, either by creating these hubs as businesses that create jobs,
Sure.
or with a policy objective of retaining the human capital that will go through these institutions. So I'm not too sure which one is which, basically. Is it to create jobs through these kind of businesses, or to retain the human capital in the future with policy of retaining expats and the children of the expats that graduate from them? The other issue is affordability. These don't come cheap, basically. The cost of attending such places is not cheap, unless you subsidize or the government is paying.
But the government in Qatar, they pay you. They pay you on one condition, that you remain in the country for a couple of years and give back what they paid you for your tuition. So I mean.
So again, the issue of are we educating the elite expatriates and what we do with the non-elite expatriates? I mean, this is the issue of social stratification.
Yes. I mean, yeah, these are questions that I truly cannot answer. I mean, I think these are, some of the objectives are on paper, this is what the objectives tell you, but whether this is going to be doable or achievable, at the time only will tell us, I guess. Yes.
Okay. Is there anybody else? I'm sorry, I saw a lot of hands before now.
Lloyd Hasboon, I was a colleague in the PSP department. This was, I think, briefly mentioned in that first question, and it might not be the main focus of your research, but I was wondering if you had a sense of why specialized cities? Why this mode of policy development and innovation picking up on this idea of a territorially sort of isolated kind of enclave? Why not have an education policy that has these institutions spread out, across the city? Why, or in Dubai or these other locations, or an environmental policy, instead of having it one small area? Why not have a policy that's more spread out. And so I
The
was wondering-
simple answer to your complex question is they want to do things big. They like big things, big scopes, I guess. I can't think of another answer to that. I mean, they just, again, as I said, they want brand names and they want them condensed so they could be, they're establishing some kind of image. Qatar is known to try to establish its image on the global map, if you want. They are known to be the first country, I believe, if I'm not, maybe I'm not, don't quote me on it, but I believe it's one of the first countries in terms of ranking, in terms of accepting exiles. Anybody who has been, what do you call it, exiled, deported from their country, they find Qatar and they are actively now engaging in peacemaking and peace building in the region and internationally.
There's interesting work by Iowa Ong from University of Berkeley, where she actually answers the question of why enclaves. She says that actually, and you mentioned this, these are all free zones. She says these are enclaves because they are meant to create a legal vacuum inside. So this enclave is a legal vacuum. Anything that applies to the country legally outside the border does not apply inside. All kinds of regulations. And she has a book, and she takes the example of China and explains these enclaves. And her book is really, her findings are amazing because she says all this is for the service of neoliberalism.
I like that.
Etc.
I'll give you a very recent example that happens in Qatar. There is an area called the Pearl. You probably have visited. It's a beautiful area where all the yachts to park and all the designer shops are there. In Qatar, you are not allowed to drink alcohol. Of course, when 2022 if they win the bid, things have to change. But you cannot drink alcohol if you are Qatari. And expats could drink alcohol, could have a drink in hotels and so forth. So what they did with the Pearl, this is very interesting, to make it legal to drink alcohol in the Pearl, they called the Pearl a 5-star resort, as if it is equal to a 5-star hotel. So you go to the Pearl for the first time in Qatar, you go to a restaurant in the Pearl and you see the alcoholic drinks displayed. So they're doing, so I understand what you're saying, because in Education City, for the first time, women, and this is a very important issue when we talk about culture-specific variables that we need to take into consideration when we talk about the Gulf. In Education City, young Qataris, the woman, in Kuwait is different. A Kuwaiti woman walks in the mall without a scarf. It's okay. You're not wearing a scarf. So it's not tradition, it's not religion. You just do it. In Qatar, still up till now, a Qatari, an original Qatari person, woman, wouldn't go out without her scarf on, even if it's a little bit of hair showing. In Education City, specifically in Georgetown, some Qatari young women are now starting to take off their abaya and their scarf in education. So I appreciate that you mentioned that book and that work, because I think it fits into the region, basically. Thank you, Lana.
Any other questions?
Hello, my name is Munir Hassan. If I give a 30-second prelude into the question. My professor, sociology professor, Dr. Samir Khanaf, he told us the story that when the university wanted to lay out the walking paths for the Green Oval, it was just a bare land, and they said, let's let the students carve out their own path. And based on what the students choose, they'll demarcate, an area. So I was wondering, in these planned cities, is there a vision for what type of kind of personality or social fabric these cities are going to have? So is there going to be like a governing mechanism inside the city that has a quota for, I guess it's already class selective, right? If it's going to cost a lot to live in these areas, but in terms of...
The Qataris go there for free.
Graduates for free.
Completely free.
But in terms of what personality, like, is there going to be this culture of tolerance, or, you know, are you going to have mixed pools, not mixed pools? Are you going to have, you know, can you build a synagogue there?
They didn't get to this yet, Munir. So at this point, they didn't even discuss the issue of having a mixed pool or not, having a chapel, a synagogue, a mosque, or whatever. They still haven't got to this. But their goal is to have a new generation of people who are who have the ability to communicate, to give their opinion, to freely express what they think. Again, this is not happening, and I don't think it's going to happen easily. I mean, this is, you know, this has to be, this goes back, if I'm an education specialist, and I could answer your question much better if you give me another 2 years, because that's my project, is to study the governance structure of Education City, including the structure, the context, the objectives, you know, de jure versus de facto, and, you know, the whole thing. So, you know, I probably would be able, but I see this is not happening. But it is the objective. They brought the first school of journalism to, you know, and the whole goal of the school of journalism is to be able to create journalists who are, and very few journalists, you probably know that, Rami, more than me, maybe, I've been told that there are only 3 Qatari journalists, Qatari journalists. I mean, most of the journalists are not Qataris, and they exercise self-censorship in terms of what they say, and, you know, how. So, you know, whether we're going to allow the students in Education City to find or to carve, how did you call it, that the Khalaf called it, to carve their own path, or whether we are carving the path for them, you know, it's, I can't tell you. I mean, you know, but from what I have observed so far, this is one of the objectives. I don't know if it happened or not.
Thank you. The original impetus for these cities, and you said there's like 18 of them or 21 of them or something. From your research so far, do you know if the impetus came from local people, or was this an idea that came from an international consultant, or the UN, or the World Bank, or foreign donors, or who originally thought up this idea? And can you trace in the diffusion if some local person in one country says we should do this because somebody else did it? Who are the real drivers behind these things?
It differs from a country to another. I know for a fact that Education City came about from basically Sheikh Moza. I mean, she had this in mind, and she worked on it. Of course, she's not the one who formulated the whole idea. I mean, they always have experts, consultants who are always expats, and that's a major issue in Qatar. I've met with somebody who is a policy analyst who is Qatari, a young lady, and she has created the first woman majlis in Qatar. First woman majlis in Qatar. It's still not intellectual, but, you know, this is a majlis. You're all familiar with what a majlis is. It's the old traditional way of a parliament, if you want, a type of parliament. So she has created the first majlis in Qatar, but she shared something with me that was really fascinating. She said, how come our vision 2030 is written in English? Written by people who are not Qatari. Sometimes you have to do this when you don't have anybody from Qatar who understands policy, who is not an expert, has not been educated. I met wonderful people in Qatar who are extremely educated, who have PhDs and are you know, passionate about doing something. And sometimes they're not recruited. They're not, you know. So comes back to the circle of experts that are allowed to enter the circle of trust that is on the inside. And so in Qatar, I would say it comes from the emir and his wife and so forth. In Abu Dhabi, we've been told, and I kind of believe the story, Lebanese people are good policy entrepreneurs and business entrepreneurs. I recruited 3 engineers from Lebanon who have access to somebody who has access to the emir and decision makers, were able to convince the emir that Masdar City would be an innovative project and so forth. Healthcare City is mostly, basically, from what we ended up finding, healthcare was a project to be, simply it was with the objective of creating a regional center for healthcare in the Gulf, state of the art, getting Harvard, the whole idea. So that's what we know. I mean, it's not easy, as you probably know already, to trace. You know, you were mentioning something about tracing, looking at the policy and then tracing back where going the other way, if you want. It's really hard to trace. I mean, you kind of find bits and pieces, and you need to talk to 27 people is not enough. 27 participants. I've done close to 76 interviews this summer, so I learned a lot more than what I learned during the study. But between Qatar and Kuwait, but the more people you talk to, the more you get. I mean, it's not enough to go on the websites and just get what they have on the website. So that's what I know.
Hi, my name is Will Hopewell. I'm a visiting student in the SOAN department. I was wondering about, transportation between these cities, and if there's any kind of effort on the part of the government or whatever agencies who are building these cities to kind of promote transportation between them. Like if you're going to have really specialized cities in the region, you'd have to go to multiple ones for different things. No?
You take the time. Simply. Within the city, of course, Masdar City, they're building this, I don't know what they call it, like metro, but it doesn't use electricity, it's environmentally safe and so forth, but this is within the city. Education City, you still, drive your car inside, basically. It's not huge, it's not as big as KAUST, which is King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. I've been told that KAUST is as big as Beirut almost. It's huge. But no, I'm not aware of any. They're building now, for example, this is kind of touches on the same subject. They're building a bridge between Bahrain and Qatar, and this bridge has been planned for almost 6-7 years ago, but now they decided to do it because of the 2022. So kind of the justification to win the bid is to say that we are building a bridge that takes you half an hour. It takes you half an hour to go from Bahrain to Qatar. So Saudi Arabia to Bahrain is half an hour, and then 1 hour you could get. So they're kind of justifying or giving more arguments for the World Cup to come. Some more attraction for them to come.
Salah Din Adada, mechanical consultant, building construction. The question is that these countries were the product of the colonial wars or the colonial era, so they are all underpopulated. And of course they are very wealthy because if you look at the map, it's all divided by a ruler. Most of the borders are straight lines, which means they are divided by people, not by natural occurrence of any kind of social movement. So the result is these countries with the wealth of energy, and now they are building specialized cities. So should this approach be applauded? Because if you want to build a culture, this is how you start. Or you think first of how to stabilize your country, because of them being underpopulated, these countries are politically unstable because they need the protection of other countries, bigger countries. And since they are a cluster of countries all near together, and eventually they made the GCC, which also a natural evolution of such a situation. Shouldn't they be thinking instead of building cities? Because before, as we saw in the picture, there were tribes, and they were undereducated also. So will these cities education city, build a culture, because they are starting from the other end of the problem. First of all, you have to think, will these cities survive if the source of energy there were out, the wells were dry? Will they survive? Because you won't be able to employ the 70% in Emirates or the 80% in Qatar. So these cities will not live like Paris, will not live like London, nor like the universities of Beirut, which has been since ever. So the question is, and this is the desert. It's a clean slate. Of course, you can be innovative. Anybody with an idea, an entrepreneur, convince one of the royalty family members, and he can give you $1 billion. They can build.
It's not as easy as you're saying.
It's not like that.
Not anymore.
It was like that. Now
It was like that,
You have to be smarter. You have to go up the stairs with a bit more clever approach. So the question is, should they be concerned about building towers, or building the desert, or forming a really strong country, or a strong union, or merging both place, reversing what the colonial wars produced, and they said, this is your situation, live with it? No. This is where innovation starts, not, I think, building the desert.
You don't have a question, you have a comment.
Yes.
So I don't have to reply.
No, you can give your opinion,
Yes.
of course. Your
Well, I
vision,
agree
because
with you.
you're
Before
talking
you
about
build the
policy.
culture outside the city, you have to build the culture of the city. I don't see any culture in Education City yet. But to be fair to them, it's going to take a while.
Not the culture.
The American University of Beirut has a culture that extends to what, like 100 and what are we, 140 something years? I mean, this is an institution. This is what we talk about, institution.
But this is
This is not an institution yet. I call it a phenomenon. A phenomena is something that happens. If it establishes itself with time, this phenomena becomes institutionalized, and then it founds itself. But at this point, it's a phenomenon. It's something. It's an occurring of something that's happening. It's outside this world. It's beyond imagination. Is whatever you want to call it. But at this point, it's just simply a phenomenon.
But you can never avoid facts. Facts. Human history is long. It's way beyond, and everybody with a vision has studied history. And whoever studied history will understand. Whoever studied history will understand such cities will not be able to survive. They are surviving because of the main fact of finance, money, their resources. So they should be warned, except of being encouraged to spend their money. Because I'm a mechanical engineer, if I have to build you a house, 22 floors upstairs, luxurious, I have to bring you water and take your plumbing over there, and have to have very large electric cables just to bring you life 80 meters above the street. So if you're living in a desert, that would be a bigger problem, because there are a lot of things that have to bring you over there, which requires a lot of engineering, of course, would be very profitable for my pocket, because I will be working all over the place, but all over the time. But this is, if I have to be honest, this shouldn't be applauded. We should be warned.
But the problem is who is going to warn them? I mean, who's
People
going to?
with vision.
Are they the policy entrepreneurs who are actually benefiting from it?
Entrepreneurs are businessmen.
Is Georgetown going to be warning them that you're doing something wrong? Or I'm getting a big
But-
share of the pie,
but I
maybe
think-
even the whole pie.
But I think most of the
that's the problem.
Most of our audience here would approve such I won't say craziness, or such deviation from the right path of city building or culture building. So it's obvious these aspects are. Sorry, I don't want to take the turn about this. Thank you.
We have one more question.
I mean, I'm just reflecting again. Don't you think this is the result of the failure of the national education system in these countries? This kind of rising up of these phenomena, as you call them, reflects the failure of the national education system in these countries to be able to create a.
Qatar has the lowest retention rate in the. What
Retention rate
the
for who you're talking about?
schools
Schools.
for schools. It has one of the lowest retention rates in the
The
Arab
students,
world.
the students.
So, I mean, what's the use?
Yeah, but let's be open about it. I mean, first, these economic cities exist outside the GCC. It's not a phenomenon created in the GCC, but they exist in Malaysia, in Singapore, and other places where you have human capital. already to make use of that, and where the economic objective is diversification. We want to diversify the economy, which I'm not sure, again, if that's the objective here. If you look at AUP, if you look at AUC, these were created by missionaries that came from outside of these countries and established themselves in these countries and captured the elite of these countries. So that's one way probably that the GCC is trying to recreate and reinvent that to an extent. I mean, this institution was not indigenous. I mean, this came from missionaries that came here and created that. The issue of sustainability, I mean, the question was raised, what happens if oil prices go down? Because these are heavily subsidized by governments, so the question mark is
Sources.
and the issue is, what Lana said, I think these societies, being very conservative culturally, they see these phenomena as a tool to promote and to push the boundaries of liberalism, culturalism. KAUST in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, is the first university where you have mixed women and men, basically. So I think they see them as a tool to push the boundaries of cultural liberalism because they fail to do it through democratic means of reforming the society itself. It may fail, it may succeed, but they are trying.
Yes, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you.
I will try to get a new person first.
Benjamin Radkanes. As I understand it, all of this is very early. We don't really know what the eventual outcome is going to be. But if you could you elaborate just a little bit for policymakers and for policy advisors, what would you tell them about the lessons learned so far? And maybe now you could get a little bit into the common problems that were faced by each of your case study cities.
I could sum it in something that all my students have learned in my classes. We boil rice, but we don't eat with chopsticks. That's what I would tell the policymakers. You cannot just take the model that have worked somewhere else. You cannot apply the democracy that is existing in the United States, in Iraq, and we have seen that it didn't work. It's not going to work in Afghanistan. It's not. So this is the first advice. I think this is the most important advice. If they could see this, if they could see that, I'll have to think about this transposition, if you want, of the models and think and involve the locals, the nationals. This is very important. I was invited by somebody who is at the level of a minister in Qatar. She is the General Secretary of the General Secretariat of Information and Communication Technology. So this is the level of the ministry. She is conducting a study, very interesting, on the impact of, conducting a study that has nothing to do with the operation of ICT. But she's an educator, she's a researcher, she wants to do something different. She has recruited some consultant group from INSEAD and big companies. So she wanted me to be there because they're proposing their research project, impact of technology on the youth in Qatar. So she wanted me to be there as a researcher, academician or whatever. I was very impressed. In the room, around the table, they were the people the consultants who are experts, but she had somebody from the competitor of the telecommunication in Qatar, who was Qatar. She had an academician who was Qatar. She had somebody from Education City, from Texas A&M University. She had somebody from the government. She had the rest of the people who were there were all Qataris. So she's doing that, involving the people. This is completely different than what's going on in Kuwait. The popular participation in Kuwait is amazing. I could tell you few stories about Kuwait. It is unbelievable. How much the public is involved. No, I don't call it public. I call it popular participation. Popular. Not just the public. Popular participation. So I think these are the first two policy recommendations. If you could get beyond these, everything else comes without saying. These are the warnings that are, and the terms that Salah, or what's his name, yes, mentioned. Yes.
Just the last question. I didn't catch up at the beginning of the lecture. Question is different from the ones previously asked. First, my name is Nizar Saidi. Question is, maybe you can highlight just about, give us a highlight or about where does the role of policymakers and circle of trust come within the education center? Like, does CMU University or different universities in the education center in Qatar, do they just come with their curriculum and there's no enforced curriculum upon them by the education
Basically, yes.
foundation, Qatar
Basically,
Foundation?
yes.
There are no requirements?
Not
Consultants.
hardcore requirements, no.
Okay.
Basically, this is the daughter of the mother university. I mean, and they come, but there's something interesting. Admission to these universities, admission requirements to these universities in Qatar are stricter and harder than the admission requirement to these universities in their home country. This is what I've been told. Again, I'm not sure if this is true, but this is what I heard. So your GRE score should be higher, your SAT score should be higher, you know, if you're applying to the education city in Qatar. But again, I'm not sure about the Qataris. You know, do the Qataris get more privilege? You know, the way we call it here in Lebanon, they have a wasta. You know, I've been told that if you have a long family name in Qatar, that means you're connected. This is something new that I heard. So instead of using the word wasta, you use the word, I have a long family name. I have a wasta, equal to wasta.
Just more of a comment than a question. You know, I find it quite extraordinary and positive that some of these governments are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on educational institutions. When you compare what they've spent money on before, which is shopping centers, real estate speculation, outrageous property developments, ski lifts, you know, the amusement that they spend on. So I think at one level, I really think this is an extraordinarily important signal that some people in the Gulf are investing large amounts of money in institutions that will take a long time to pay a dividend. And I think we need to keep in mind that, as Hiba said, that, you know, AUB was set up by a bunch of Protestant ministers, and look what it's done now for the Arab world in the last 160 years. And don't forget what, you know, when Arabs and Muslims went to Europe and set up, you know, medical schools in Cordoba, what that produced in terms of the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment a couple of centuries later. So these things take a long time to bear fruit. But I can tell you from my experience visiting some of these institutions and talking to their people, once this process starts, it will get a life of its own. But it won't get that momentum for another probably generation. So I think it's way too early to judge these institutions and to try to come up with any kind of an assessment of what is their ultimate result going to be. They're completely unsustainable by themselves. They're completely the most ridiculous economic model you could think of because they're completely funded by the governments, and the governments understand this. So why would they do this? So I just look at them from the perspective of somebody in the Arab world who sees these wealthy governments spending money on training human minds, which strikes me as very positive.
I think we'll take the last two questions now. So was there one here or no?
Actually, I have many questions.
Oh.
I'm Joe Vidal, colleague in the History Department.
Hello, sir.
Listen, it seems to me that, contrary to what our friends would think, your case study is a case study of public policy making under the laws of abundance rather than the laws of scarcity.
Sure.
So we need to run outlays like excessive money we need to operate. Secondly, it seems to me that your focus, which is very legitimate as a student of public policy, is on the actors in the policy process and determinants of the public policy, rather than the ultimate finality of public policy from an economic perspective or from a visionary perspective. A third point would be, you mentioned very intelligently the determinants of public policy concerning the social, political, economic determinants. I wish if I could see a priority into this. Let the analysis go in deeper to sketch out the architecture of the determinants and if you want the coefficients. A pie chart that would say economic factors, social factors,
Interesting.
political factors, etc.
Let's work together on this.
Secondly, that issue of Harvard in Dubai, or Cornell in Dubai, etc. With due respect to Harvard, etc., I do understand that there is an exchange model whereas Harvard is the winning part and not the recipient or the so-called
This is
recipient.
definitely not a win-win situation.
Yes, it's not.
Well, it is a win-win. Actually, no, it is a win-win situation. They're winning something, which is the chink down sign, and then on that part they're getting Harvard to be part of their.
As someone who taught for more than 30 years, and I'm familiar with the science and education and research policies in Lebanon, in the Middle East, etc. I don't think that these newly established universities, Harvard, etc., are having stricter requirements for admission. I would say possibly they are offering a facade whereby it shows that they are stricter, but in reality, it's very much like the make up for an agonizing person, etc. It's a facade, it's a mask. A final point, the
That's why I said this is what I've been told.
Now, the stakeholders of the present and in the policy making process are not necessarily the beneficiaries of the future. I would look into this as intergenerational inequality or intergenerational going nowhere. God knows where the future generation, 20% of the initial Qataris, would be, say, by the year 2030, 2040, 2050, given the high level of political uncertainty in the Middle East and of the Qatari-US very strong ties into this. I would say Qatar is a very established pied-à-terre for US policy rather than in other hands. So I just throw 6 ideas. I don't expect you to answer the 6, but you will
Future
discuss them.
research.
Future research.
Thank you.
So we'll take the last question now. Anybody new? Oh, no.
Just to comment on you said, institutions are the product of a philosophy, usually. If a culture or a certain group of society has a philosophy about life, they would produce institutions that would reflect their vision about life, the way they see life. This was the case for Cordoba, this was the case with the Muslims, this was the case for AB, who came over and started here. Starting an institution will not give you a philosophy. What I see there is confusion, because building a tower, that tallest tower in the desert, the scope, the whole scope of the city, wherever you turn your face, it goes into your eye, the needle. It's usually you build a floor above a floor because you have a problem of space, but there's not a problem of space. So I see confusion. I don't see vision for if we build the best city, education city in the world. And you said about everything has to be big there. It doesn't say about people, because they built all the touristic cities and all the other type cities or the ports. Now they're building education cities because everybody say you have to come, because everybody was maybe mocking them down under that they are not very well educated and people were taking advantage of them. So now they may be doing this out of guilt or something. It's not the case, but institutions should be the result of philosophy. They want to build a philosophy.